The Zorathians had been unstoppable for centuries. They were a race born for war. Their fleets, vast and relentless, scoured the galaxy with cold precision. Planets fell before them like crops ready for harvest. They crushed civilizations and bent others to their will. But the Torvani were different. They were ancient, older than the Zorathians themselves, and they fought not for conquest, but for survival. The Torvani had withstood many invasions before. Each time the Zorathians came with superior weapons and tactics, yet each time the Torvani pushed them back. Their cities burned, but their hearts remained unbroken until this day. The Zorathians had spent weeks in orbit above Torvani's capital city, bombarding it from space. Their weapons sliced through the atmosphere with brutal efficiency. Their warships unleashed streams of laser fire that leveled entire districts one by one. The Torvani defenders fought bravely, their resistance fierce. But the weight of the Zorathian war machine was too much. Even the mightiest of the Torvani warlords fell to the relentless onslaught. The Zorathians were certain of victory. The planet's defenders were crumbling under the pressure. On the surface, Torvani soldiers lined the walls of the last stronghold, fighting tooth and nail against wave after wave of alien invaders. The ground shook with the roar of exploding shells, and the air hummed with the sounds of weapons fire. The Torvani had constructed impressive defensive structures, their cities fortified with advanced technology, but it was not enough against the sheer scale of Zorathian firepower. Their shield generators were failing one by one, and soon the last of their great defenses would be shattered. The remaining Torvani leaders were preparing for the final push. They would die in battle or die with honor, but either way they would not surrender. In the skies above the final battleground, Zorathian warships formed a perfect arc, their weapons primed for the finishing blow. The leader of the Zorathian fleet, an imposing figure named Admiral Vrath, looked down at the shattered city and smiled. He had seen this many times before, a civilization on the brink of collapse, just a final push, and it would be over. He had no doubts that victory was imminent. The Torvani were strong, but the Zorathians were stronger, and in his mind, there was no force that could stop him now. He ordered his fleet to fire the final wave of destruction that would bring the Torvani to their knees. But as his ships prepared to unleash hellfire upon the last stronghold, a strange signal flickered across his command console, a warning from deep space. The source was unknown, but the message was clear and precise. A fleet had entered the Torvani system. The signature was unlike anything they had encountered before. Vrath's eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. The ships were small compared to the massive Zorathian warships, but they were moving at speeds that defied all known science. Their engines left a trail of energy that lit up the void like a comet heading toward them. Without hesitation, Vrath ordered his fleet to take defensive positions. He had faced many strange threats before, but nothing had ever made his gut twist with unease quite like this. The Zorathians had never before encountered such a challenge, and they were about to learn that their victory was not as certain as they had believed. The unknown fleet appeared on the edge of the system, a blur against the cold backdrop of the void. Their ships moved with an unnatural grace, darting through space, as if they had always belonged there. And yet the Zorathian sensors failed to fully comprehend their technology. These ships were unlike anything the Zorathians had ever seen, sleek and angular with strange glowing lines running along their hulls. The ships seemed to shimmer in the light, as if they were made of something not quite real. The Zorathians had never been afraid of any enemy before, but as these unknown vessels drew closer, a chill ran down the spine of Admiral Vrath. Something about them felt wrong. The ships glided forward, their movements calculated, precise, and in moments they were within range. Vrath watched as the first of the enemy ships fired a single shot. The energy beam lanced through space and struck one of the Zorathian warships with terrifying accuracy. The ship disintegrated in an explosion so powerful that the shockwave rattled the entire fleet. The Zorathians stared in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Their weapons had always been unstoppable. No enemy had ever survived a direct hit, and yet these strange ships had torn through their defenses as if they were nothing more than paper shields. Vrath clenched his fists on the command console as panic began to ripple through his crew. The Zorathians were masters of warfare. They were the conquerors of galaxies, but now they were under attack by a force they did not understand. Before Vrath could issue an order, a second ship fired, and then a third, each shot striking with deadly precision. And every strike left a Zorathian warship dead in its wake. The fleet had no time to react, no time to regroup. It was as if the humans were everywhere. At once the humans, the Zorathians, had never heard of them. They had never even encountered this species before, yet here they were turning the tide of battle within moments. The invincible Zorathian armada was beginning to fall apart. Vrath watched in disbelief as more ships entered the fray. The unknown fleet now surrounded them from all sides. They had been expecting an easy victory, expecting to crush the Torvani and move on to their next conquest. But now they were fighting for their very survival. It was clear that these humans did not operate like any species they had ever faced before. They fought with a tenacity that was almost animalistic, as if they had been born for war. And yet there was something else, something deeper in the way they fought. They were not just attacking to win, they were attacking to destroy everything in their path. The Zorathian fleet began to scatter, but the humans were relentless. They pursued with laser-like focus, each ship moving as though it were part of a single unified force, as if they could think and act as one entity. The humans were not simply fighting against the Zorathians. They were tearing apart the very concept of Zorathian supremacy, one strike at a time. As Vrath gave orders to retreat, he realized something with a sinking feeling in his gut. They were not just fighting a war now, they were fighting for their lives. And this enemy was unlike any they had ever encountered. In the midst of the chaos, the Zorathians realized that they had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to face the consequences of that mistake. The Zorathian fleet had become a disjointed mess, their ships scattered and vulnerable. The humans were relentless. They moved with an almost predatory precision. Each attack was timed perfectly, and every strike left a Zorathian warship crippled or destroyed. The sheer power of their weapons was unlike anything the Zorathians had ever seen. Entire vessels disintegrated in a single burst of energy. The Zorathians had once believed themselves to be the most advanced species in the galaxy, but now they were being shown the bitter truth that their technology was no match for the ferocity of human ingenuity. From the human ships came the hellish firepower they had never imagined. Every cannon fired in perfect synchronization, each burst of energy like a flash of lightning cutting through the dark void of space. With terrifying accuracy, the Zorathian fleet's once impenetrable shields flickered and then collapsed under the onslaught. The humans had developed weapons that bent the laws of physics themselves, beams of concentrated energy that seemed to warp space around them as they tore through the Zorathian ships. Like paper, the humans did not fight like other races. They didn't simply engage in battle. They seemed to enjoy it. Their strikes were brutal and efficient, but there was something almost cruel about the way they destroyed their enemies. They didn't just kill their foes, they obliterated them, completely leaving no trace of their existence. The Zorathian fleet commanders tried to regroup, ordering their remaining ships to form tight defensive formations, but it was useless. The humans were too fast and too relentless. Their ships were agile, darting between firestorms and striking with deadly accuracy. It seemed as though they were everywhere. At once the humans didn't need to outnumber the Zorathians. They didn't need to have superior numbers or ships. They just needed to be where their enemies were weakest and strike hard and fast. Every time the Zorathians thought they had found a weakness, the humans would exploit it in ways they had never considered before. On the ground, the situation was just as dire. The Torvani cities that had once been engulfed in the brutal bombardment from the Zorathian warships now had something else to fear. The humans were deploying ground-based weapons unlike anything the Torvani had ever seen, massive energy cannons that carved through the earth and reduced entire city blocks to rubble in seconds. These weapons were not designed to capture or subdue. They were designed to annihilate. Every street became a battleground, every building a potential fortress torn apart by the human assault. The Zorathians had expected their ground forces to maintain control, but now they were facing something far more deadly than they had ever imagined. As the Zorathians fought to keep their ground troops alive, the humans' firepower seemed to multiply. The air was thick with the sound of explosions, and the heat of battle was unbearable. Even from orbit, the Zorathians could see the destruction unfolding below. The once proud Torvani cities now lay in ruins, But it was not just the cities that were falling, it was their entire way of life. Their resistance was fading, their people were on the brink of total collapse, and all they could do was watch as humanity's hellish firepower wiped away everything they had fought to protect. Vrath stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the chaos unfold across the battlefield. He clenched his fists in frustration. The humans had turned the tide of the war in mere hours. He had been confident in his victory. But now the Zorethians were facing total annihilation. They were on the brink of defeat, and no amount of strategy or advanced weaponry seemed to matter against the sheer power and ruthlessness of their new enemies. The humans had shown that they could not be defeated by conventional means. The only thing left was survival, and the Zorethians were not sure they would make it out alive. The Zorethians were beginning to break. They had never known fear, not like this. Their perfect war machine was crumbling before them. With every passing minute, their fleet was slowly being torn apart, their once dominant forces reduced to fleeing remnants of what they had been. Panic spread across the Zorethian ranks as the humans seemed to hunt them down like a pack of wolves circling their prey, each attack more devastating than the last. The Zorethian commanders called for reinforcements, but they had no reserves to draw upon. Their supply lines were shattered, and the humans moved faster than any of their ships could react. Vrath stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the screen showing the destruction unfolding across the battlefield. His mind raced as his orders were carried out with no result. His fleet was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. His pride, his confidence was being shredded in front of him. He had underestimated humanity, and now the consequences were being felt across the galaxy. The humans were relentless, their strategy so simple and so effective. It was terrifying. They were not interested in taking prisoners or negotiating. They were here to destroy, and to make sure there would be nothing left of the Zorethian Empire but ash and ruin. He watched helplessly as one of his warships was struck directly by a barrage of fire from the human fleet. The ship's shields cracked and then shattered in a burst of energy. The ship's hull buckled and exploded in a blinding flash of light. It was gone in an instant, as though it had never existed at all. There was nothing left of it, not even debris, nothing, but a growing silence as the enemy moved closer and closer to the heart of their operations. Vrath was forced to confront a horrifying realization. The Zorethians were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. They had been reduced to prey. The humans did not care for honor or terms of war. They fought with an unrelenting ferocity that left no room for negotiation. They fought with everything they had, and they would stop at nothing until the Zorethians were erased from existence. The idea of a counterattack seemed almost laughable to Vrath at this point. Every strategy he had known, every tactic he had learned in his years of conquest, was useless here. The humans had adapted to their environment with terrifying speed and precision. Their ships moved like extensions of their will, and their ground forces showed no mercy. The Zorethians had always been the ones to strike fear into their enemies, but now they were the ones cowering in the face of an enemy they could not understand. Across the battlefield, the Zorethian forces were disintegrating. Their once great warships were no match for the relentless power of humanity's firepower. Their ground forces were scattered, their morale shattered with every retreat. The humans pushed forward without hesitation. Their weapons never faltered, their focus never wavered. The Zorethians' proud empire, which had once stretched across the stars, was now crumbling in real time. Vrath realized they were losing, and losing badly. The hope of victory that had once seemed inevitable was slipping through his fingers. He began to consider a retreat, but it was too late. The humans had already anticipated it. Their ships surrounded the Zorethian remnants, cutting off any chance of escape. The humans had become the hunters, and the Zorethians the hunted in this brutal game of war. In his desperation, Vrath made one final decision. He ordered the Zorethian fleet to turn their weapons on their own ships. If they could not escape, they would at least take the humans down with them. But even as he issued the command, a voice from his crew spoke with a trembling tone. The human ships were already moving in to intercept. Vrath knew that his empire had come to an end. In the depths of space, the Zorathian fleet had no more options left. They had fought for hours, days perhaps, but nothing seemed to turn the tide. The humans were too swift, too relentless, their weapons too devastating, and with each passing moment, the Zorathians found themselves more and more isolated from the rest of the galaxy. They had been the ones who imposed fear across the stars, but now they were the ones fleeing across an endless dark sky in desperation. Vrath ordered a last-ditch attack, a final weapon that could either wipe out the humans or allow the Zorathians to escape the planet they had sought to conquer. The Zorathians had long kept in reserve a weapon of mass destruction, a planet-destroying energy cannon, capable of leveling an entire city or obliterating a fleet with a single strike. It was their ultimate weapon, and now it was the only hope they had left. The weapon's energy surged through the ship's core in preparation. The Zorathians were ready to fire the cannon at the heart of the human fleet. Their target was the flagship of the humans, the command vessel that led the relentless assault. As the Zorathian ship locked onto its target, Vrath's heart raced. He had ordered the cannon fired in every battle before and watched his enemies crumble. But this was different. The human fleet had already shown their power in ways no other species had ever done before. Vrath hoped that their weapon would do what their fleet could not: finish the battle once and for all, but he knew the odds were slim. It was their final chance. The cannon charged with a deafening hum. As energy gathered at its core, Vrath gave the command to fire, and the weapon unleashed its devastating power. A beam of concentrated destruction shot across the void of space, a flash of bright energy that traveled faster than light. It raced toward the human flagship and struck its target with unthinkable force. The explosion that followed seemed to shake the very stars themselves. It was as if the entire galaxy had held its breath and then exhaled in a single burst of brilliant light. For a moment there was nothing but silence. In the wake of the explosion, Vrath held his breath, waiting to see if his weapon had done its job, if the humans had finally been destroyed. But the silence stretched on too long. A sinking feeling settled deep in his chest. His eyes locked onto the view screens as they focused on the site where the human flagship had been moments before, and what he saw shocked him. The human ship was still there, no debris, no signs of destruction. The flagship was undamaged, and in fact, it appeared to be moving closer toward the Zorathian fleet. Vrath's mind raced. The humans had done something no one could have anticipated. They had deployed a shield far more powerful than anything the Zorathians had ever encountered. They had absorbed the energy of the cannon's blast, and now they were closing in on the remnants of the Zorathian fleet, their weapons ready for the final strike. Vrath's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the horrifying truth. The Zorathians had never faced an enemy like this before. The humans were not only surviving the battle, they were winning the battle, and now they were preparing to end the war once and for all. The Zorathians had no more cards to play. Their final weapon had failed, and their ships were surrounded. There was no escape. The humans had turned the tide, and now the Zorathian Empire was crumbling in front of their eyes. The Zorathian fleet was broken beyond repair, their ships scattered across the stars like shattered fragments of a once proud empire. The humans had shown no mercy, their firepower relentless and devastating. Each attack had brought the Zorathians closer to their final hour, and now the end was inevitable. With no escape and no place to retreat, the Zorathians were left with nothing but the crushing reality of their defeat. The humans had come from nowhere, had appeared out of the blackness of space, and torn apart everything the Zorathians had worked for with terrifying speed and precision. Vrath stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his crew scrambled in a final attempt to salvage anything that could save them. But it was too late. Every escape route had been blocked. Every defensive maneuver was futile. The humans had surrounded them, their ships like iron claws, closing in from all sides. The battle that had once seemed like a sure victory for the Zorathians was now a hopeless struggle for survival. In his mind, Vrath knew the truth. Their empire was over. The humans had torn apart the heart of their war machine, and now there was no more strength left to resist. He had ordered the Zorathian fleet to fight until the last ship remained, but even he could no longer ignore the fact that their forces were broken, and that no amount of stubbornness would change the inevitable defeat. The once feared Zorathians were now on the brink of extinction. their greatest fleets, their most powerful warships, reduced to floating wreckage in the dark void of space. On the surface of Torvani, the surviving defenders watched from shattered city walls. As the final stages of the battle played out above them, the humans had turned the tide of the war, and now it was clear that the Zorathians would no longer be a threat. The land that had once been scorched by Zorathian weapons was now a battlefield where the Torvanian humans stood side by side as comrades instead of conquerors. The Torvani had once been a proud and ancient species. They had fought valiantly to defend their homes, but it had been the humans who had delivered the final blow to their enemies. And in doing so, they had become more than just allies. They had become the saviors of an entire world. The humans landed on the surface, their ships touching down in the ruins of Torvani cities, and their soldiers emerging from the craft in organized columns. They moved with purpose, their faces set with grim determination. Their firepower was unmatched, and now it was clear that they were no longer just a species fighting for survival. They were the future of the galaxy, and the Zorathians were nothing more than a dying relic of the past. Vrath's ship was the last remaining vessel of the Zorathian fleet. It floated helplessly in space as the humans closed in their ships, formed a perfect circle around the last bastion of Zorathian power. The humans did not fire immediately. They watched their prey circling as if savoring the moment of victory. Vrath stood motionless before the command console as the human ships approached. A final message flashed across his screen. The humans had sent a communication. They were offering terms of surrender. But in that moment, Vrath knew there would be no negotiations, no compromises. The Zorathians had forfeited the right to peace with their unrelenting conquest and their cruelty across the stars. The humans had come not to negotiate, but to end the reign of the Zorathians once and for all.